Morning, everyone. Happy Hump Day, and welcome to the News Agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by my fellow Mirror columnist and sports writer, Darren Lewis. Morning, Darren.
Morning. How are you?
I'm all right. Now, we're going to take you through the biggest stories of the day, and through it all, we want you to ask us your questions. Get into the comments, tell us whatever's burning a hole in your head, and we will do our best to explain it for you, and perhaps to ourselves. We can't answer them all, but we will answer the best ones. So what have we got today? Well, England won some sort of sports fixture yesterday, which is a yay if you're a football fan and a double yay if you're a COVID fan, because we have no way of knowing yet whether it might lead to any kind of spread of the virus. Let that not stop this government, though, because on the day that 1,000 travel workers are marching on Westminster, what a coincidence, they are briefing furiously that this summer will not only see the vaccinated be allowed to go to amber countries without quarantining afterwards, but they can take their children too. Woo! So, Darren, are these the same children who are unvaccinated? Is this a walking biological warfare experiment? And are they allowed in football matches yet, kids that haven't had a vaccine?
Well, I think the most important thing you've just done there, Susie, is you've joined the dots, because this government's very adept at misdirection. Whenever something looks as though it could be quite difficult for them, they throw out bits of information, either to get us excited, to get us fighting against each other, or to just draw the attention really away from the issue that's turning up the heat on them. But as you rightly say, Lizzie Buchan, our political correspondent, she said it in our paper today, in that very double page spread. In fact, I think it's the next one on, that the number of our kids missing class due to COVID-19 has nearly tripled in a week. And these are according to government figures. She said that school absences in England, they're at their highest rate since the reopening in March, with 240,000, I think it is 3.3% out on June the 17th, compared to 1.2% the previous week. And as I say, these are figures from the Department of Education. So now, assuming they're not out because their parents want to take them on a cheeky holiday, it says to me that we have to continue to be careful. And I speak as someone with kids climbing the wall, wanting to go on a holiday. I would love to go on one myself, but we still do have the risks. And I was watching TV a bit earlier before I came on here, and the German Chancellor Angela Merkel was describing Great Britain as a COVID variant hotspot. And she was expressing her concerns. I know we're going to get to the football in a bit, but she was expressing her concerns about the government saying that 60,000 people can come to matches in the semi-final and the final of the European Championships, because there are all these issues around this country that we like to stick our heads in the sand. Well, the government like to stick their heads in the sand over. So, in a word, I'm concerned by the statistics. I'm also concerned by the government's approach to those statistics, to try and sort of offset them by getting people excited about potentially going on holiday. They've done it over Freedom Day. They've done it over so many things, only to backtrack and then following the science.
Yeah, there will be some good news coming up in the future at some point, which shows that we're doing everything right. It just hasn't happened yet. That's kind of the undercurrent that happens all the way through this. Now, Gerard says, morning, Gerard, why have restrictions not been lifted for fully vaccinated people? Partly it's because people who are fully vaccinated can still, although they may be fine and not hospitalized, they can still transmit the virus. They can still catch it and transmit it, Gerard. Very small chance of doing so, but you can still do it. And that means the people who are still unvaccinated are at risk still. And we have about 60% of adults fully vaccinated so far. And because of the Delta variant, the 82% who've had one jab, they're not fully enough protected from this more infectious variant. Now, Israel didn't open up properly, I think, until 75% of their population was vaccinated thoroughly. So we're still a little way off, despite the success of the vaccine program. It's not quite as successful as some other countries, despite what the government wants to tell you. Now, Carol says, why aren't Malta and some Greek islands green? Why won't this government help with the travel industry, but will fill Wembley for football? It boils my blood. The traffic light system is a shambles. Traffic light system is a shambles. But there is a difference, isn't there, Darren, between football stadiums and holidays? Because when you go to a football stadium, they've usually got the roof off. And it's open air. There is some social distancing. You have to have passport, vaccine exemption or certificate or negative test. When you go on holiday, there's fewer testing, and of course you're going to be in confined spaces with people for a long period of time, in an airport, on a train, in a airplane, in a hotel lobby or whatever. So there is a bit of a difference to what Carol's asking there in terms of why some things can happen and some people can't. But what are the, when you watch a football match, what are the, you know, how many children are at a football match? How many tests do you have to go through to get in?
Well, it's a really good question. It gives me an opportunity to kind of talk about what it does take for me to get into a football match, because what I have to do is provide a negative test. I've got to upload it to the NHS website, and that has to be taken within 51 hours of the event itself. And you cannot get into the stadium. This is not like it was before. You cannot get into the stadium unless you show that negative test. And they're very, very strict about that. So what it does mean is, of course, as you rightly say, you're in the open air, but everyone who goes into that stadium has provided a negative test, and UEFA are particularly strict about that. Some people would say, well, hang on, and I know this myself. I went to Portugal last year. You couldn't get on a plane unless you provided a negative test to get on the plane. But then once you go out there, you could be mixing with any number of people who haven't, as you say, provided negative tests. You don't know what their status is. So I agree with you. There's a big difference between a football match where you know that the people you're interacting with, there is some level of health security, if you like, and a holiday when there isn't.
Well, we're going to get to the health security issue a bit later. Hold that thought. Now, Gerard, hello again. Why is there not enough help and support for people suffering from mental health problems over this pandemic, and the media aren't covering enough on mental health? The fact there's not very much support for mental health is because it's been the poor relation of physical health, according to repeated and successive governments of all stripes in this country for decades, in fact. It's only now really starting to get some of the attention that it deserves. And as for the media not covering enough on mental health, I've just had a quick look. If you Google mirror.co.uk mental health and coronavirus, Gerard, you'll get 19.7 million results. The first one, statistics reveal the true impact of coronavirus lockdown. Mental health, all about. Experts warn of rapidly deteriorating mental health in children. COVID's hurt the NHS and recovery for mental health. Blah, 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 blah. The reason you know about it, Gerard, is because we are covering it, I'm afraid, or I'm happy to say. Now, they're talking about scrapping this requirement to quarantine. That's what the government's saying today from the Amber Country for 10 days, which does sort of prove Sage's original point when the government introduced that it doesn't work, and which most of us know anyway. And then you've got the thing that Darren was talking about school children can still catch COVID. On the corner of page 9, it's reported the number of school infections has tripled in a week, and so is the number of kids who are off school. And those risks are due to being inside school and the chances of catching coronavirus or coming into contact with it inside school rather than outside. So that's when we start talking about the vaccination of children in order to protect their chances of education rather than to protect them against coronavirus, perhaps. But is it a good idea then to let families mix abroad this summer? Are you going to do it?
It's a really tough question because, as I said before, Susie, the families are desperate to go on holiday. And as you said, there are those question marks around the quarantine system. But then you look at the numbers in relation to kids. And although the rate of incidence amongst kids isn't causing serious harm in the main, I have to stress, because obviously there are some exceptions, but they can pass it on to adults who could be subject to harm. We can't kid ourselves about the fact that there is a growing, fairly significant lobby, shall we say, people who don't want to get vaccinated, who don't buy into all of the statistics and the facts around the coronavirus, and they are not protecting themselves health-wise, and they could be affected, sadly. So I would be against taking my children and putting them into that kind of situation. With all of the added risks as well that Gerard points to, the mental health risks and as well. I just think it's so difficult to do that, and I would rather err on the side of caution. I know you have thought it, don't you,
We're going to North Yorkshire this year, and that'll do us. Well, I'd love to just get on a plane and go somewhere else, but it's not a good idea, I don't think. I'm with you on that. But there are some people who are going to say, well, look, what you're doing there is making people with children almost like a second-class citizen. You're saying that the adults, the pensioners have been double jabbed, go off, don't have to quarantine, have a great time. If you've got children, you can't go. And some of those people aren't just having holidays. They're trying to see family. They're trying to do work. They've got to go and live in a different country. They've got a partner who's from a different country, and they want to see relatives, perhaps work over there. And so they're going to have more problems, perhaps. But if the children aren't vaccinated, then they represent, as Angela Merkel was talking about, really, a huge reservoir for the virus to circulate in and perhaps throw up new variants. And there are plenty of children who've got immune suppressed people in their families, people having treatment for cancer and so on. And those people aren't going to be going abroad, are they? And exposing their children. Now, Martin says, there now seems to be additional variants, both in India and in the USA, which are more transmissible and could also possibly be resistant to the vaccine. It seems stupid to destroy all the good the vaccine program's done so far by opening up foreign travel. There's almost a certainty the variants will arrive here if it is opened up. As for filling Wembley, it's just asking for trouble, in my opinion. But you were at a football match yesterday, weren't you, Darren?
Well, I was, and just on top of that, Susie, I think we tend to we talk about the other countries where these variants exist, and I think we have to bear in mind the unrestricted travel in this country throughout the height of this pandemic. We've had that here, and the government only really acted late in the pandemic after nearly a year to close borders and to restrict travel. So we're talking about other countries having these variants, but they could have been here for months. And so I agree with Martin and all the other people who have expressed concerns over foreign travel. Like you, I would want to be safe. I wouldn't be in a situation where I would put myself or my kids at risk. And I think when I go to a football match, if it were not the case that I would have to do as many things, and trust me, you really do have to jump through a few hoops even to get into the stadium, I would be concerned about doing that. We're at a period of time where we've seen the carnage that the COVID virus has wreaked on our entire society. So I would rather err on the side of caution.
Yeah. The trouble, of course, with some of the football matches is how people get there. If they're all on the tube, if they're all going to the pub afterwards, still got to follow the rule of 6 at the moment. But, social distancing and so on, it doesn't really necessarily always work in a football match, does it? Especially when you've got fears of flu making a big comeback this winter. Now, in other news, England won a football match last night, which means they are one step closer to choking it in the semis on penalties. Scotland are out, but Wales is still in. And unfortunately for Welsh fans, on the sidebar there, down on the left-hand side, not only are they banned from travelling to Amsterdam for their next match against Denmark, but there'll be no fan zones in Cardiff city centre to watch the match on giant screens. Now, Darren, how important are these fan zone thingies, and why aren't they having them?
Well, the fan zones are particularly important for the people who don't have the tickets to get into the stadium. You were talking before about the people who are travelling on public transport together to get to stadiums. But the only people really who would be doing that would be people with tickets. But there are, as we know, people who can't get into the stadium. And for them, the match is a social event. So the next best thing is a fan zone, an area where you can get together, have a laugh, have a drink, and watch on a big screen. But for obvious reasons, lots of cities around Europe are choosing not to have them. I remember talking to the UEFA president in November 2019, and he was talking about the potential security risks back then of a fan zone. But he would have been not breathing a sigh of relief at all, but because of the coronavirus, lots of cities have scrapped having the fan zones because they are potential hotspots for transmission. So, and they don't want to be encouraging fans to gather together in specific parts of any one city across Europe. So, for example, Chelsea, they didn't have a parade after they won the Champions League last month for a very similar reason. They didn't want to be seen to be encouraging football fans to gather together, tens of thousands of them, in one space. And that's why we won't have fan zones.
It's also a bit though, isn't it, about how it looks? Because Kate says there, 65,000 at a football match, but we can't have 10,000 at a festival. Come on, we can all test 3 times a week if need be. The thing is that people see people at a football match and they think, well, why can't we do this then? Why can't we do that? Why can't we do the other? They don't necessarily know all about the testing and so on. And yeah, you could test before you go into a festival, but Kate, you're at a football match for 90 minutes, maybe 2 hours, whereas you're at a festival for a weekend or maybe at least a day. And what are the chances of someone snogging you at one or other of those venues? Probably greater at the festival, I would guess. Although, it depends if England win, of course, at the match. So it's partly how it looks, isn't it? That's part of the reason they don't want to do it, is because it encourages people to get together in other ways. They've got to be seen to be going, no, it's still dangerous. You still got to be careful. But then you've got Wembley opening up at 75 capacity, and people are going to think there's very mixed messages in that, aren't they?
You're throwing me a bit with the snogging, but I'm going to try and keep my focus.
Tell me it doesn't happen, Darren. Go on.
But look, again, and just for people who are joining us late having this conversation, I think it's important to reiterate, if I go to a football match like I did last night, and I've been to the other games at Wembley as well, Wembley, for starters, it's only 22,500 people allowed into a stadium that holds nearly 100,000. So that's less than a quarter capacity.
But for the finals or the semi, they're saying it'll be 75% capacity, 67,500.
Absolutely. And as I said before, the German Chancellor Angela Merkel rightly is expressing concern about that, because she is describing the UK as a COVID variant hotspot. And with some justification, the numbers suggest, we had 120, 130,000 people lose their lives. We've got countless others whose lives have been wrecked and are in poor health. So there are genuine concerns around that in the semi-finals and final. But firstly, we're nowhere near there yet. So I don't think that's a concern for us just yet. And secondly, for the people that are at grounds at the moment, they are not people, as you rightly said, there is a big difference between taking the test, proving that you have a negative test, getting into the stadium, wearing a mask, sitting 2 meters away from everyone and following all the rules that you have to follow to be able to even get into the stadium, and a festival where, as you rightly say, you might take the test and be shown to be negative when you get in, but once you're in, you could abandon all of those things that they're doing at Wembley very, very strictly to allow the whole thing, and right across Europe as well, to allow the whole thing to go off safely and to protect the people taking part.
And at a festival, you're probably a bit younger and probably a bit less likely to be vaccinated. But there's another story that's doing the rounds this morning, that although you do have to show proof of negative tests and vaccination to get into Wembley, and therefore probably no children going in there, it also turns out that thousands, and in the low thousands is the quote, of VIPs will be able to fly in from abroad for those matches, the semis and the final, without having to self-isolate for 10 days when they get here to make sure they're not infectious. Now, Darren, this looks like the opening up chances of whole new strains of a virus to me. Why are they doing this for the VIPs? Are these the UEFA officials and, national government ministers and stuff who want to come in and watch their team if they get to the finals?
Yes, in a word, and I'm not going to defend it in any way, shape or form. It's a mixed message when you consider how strict UEFA are with people like me who want to get into matches, with countries who where players like, for example, Billy Gilmore, the Scotland midfielder, tested positive for COVID last Friday. UEFA insisted on the players that had come into contact with him, on them having to self-isolate for 10 days. They missed the match last night. Very, very, very strict with players, with countries, with people, with employees who want to get into grounds. And then in the next breath, the double standard. They want to be able to have the rules relaxed for them to get into games and sit and enjoy their hospitality and watch the game in comfort and not have to quarantine. It's a shambles, frankly. And I think there are questions for UEFA to answer over that, because where people are right in pointing out double standards is this. I can't listen. I work in football and I can't give you any defense for what UEFA are asking for. And I would hope Angela Merkel, who's been so critical of the plan to let 60,000 people into stadia for the semi-finals and the finals. I hope she's not there, because that double standard would be breathtaking.
Yeah, of course, there's going to be whichever countries. Is this kind of feedback going on? Weird. Whichever countries get into the finals and semi-finals, of course, they're going to have to tell their fans whether they can or cannot come to Wembley and fly in to watch the match, and have some political domestic problems with that. And as Leslie's just saying there, because there is this double standard of some officials being allowed in without quarantine, while fans don't have that right, she's saying it's a lie, it's the biggest hoax in history, dum-de-dum. Now, I don't know, Leslie, how it's a hoax, because that'd be a hell of a conspiracy that's taken in the entire planet. There's an awful lot of people who've had to die or fake their symptoms, especially on television, and to journalists. And if you're going to hoax it, you'd think someone was getting something out of it somewhere. And I don't know what Boris Johnson's getting out of it. He had a majority before this and he was quite popular. Less so now. Now, Mike says it's not really a mixed message. Government message has always been that VIPs like them don't have to live by the rules they enforce on the rest of us. Now, I suppose, Darren, before we move on to some other news, I suppose what they're going to say is that those VIPs, those thousands of UEFA VIPs, will be vaccinated. They'll be tested every day. They'll be very, very low risk. But they said exactly the same thing about the officials who were going to the G7 in Cornwall. And that led to hotspots of coronavirus around the places in Falmouth and Carbis Bay where the politicians and the officials and the press were all gathering. So even though you are testing every day, it doesn't stop these things coming in at all. Of course, it doesn't matter in the least if England, to us, really, if England doesn't get to the match, because when none of our guys will be in there trying to catch it. But of course, potentially, people in England will be catching it when they're on their way out again, won't they?
Well, they will, and the reason I say it is a mixed message is because the rules are very stringent for footballers and for staff, employees, journalists who are working at these games. I'll be at Wembley, for example, at the weekend for the game between Italy and Austria. And everyone taking part, everyone involved will have to follow the rules. They shouldn't have to change because of your status within UEFA, even though you are going through the same protocols as somebody like myself in order to get into the stadium. So it is a double standard. And I think, as you say, when you do start to have those double standards, you do start to have those hotspots. You do start to have those incidences where people are affected who might not necessarily be connected with football. It might just be the guy who's there as a steward, just trying to earn a few bob doing his job. Or it might just be the woman who's handing out the accreditation or whatever. We have to be fair to everybody. And I think this plan, for me, is fraught with danger. And I think they're going to get their way as well, which concerns me even more.
Yeah, I thought UEFA VIP is probably the least important people to be in the match. If you've got to choose, I would have thought. Simon says, did the G7 VIPs quarantine for 10 days? No, they didn't. I think Justin Trudeau did in a hotel in Toronto when he went home. I'm not sure about the others, but some of them did. Did they socially distance when drinking and watching the Red Arrows? No, not according to the paper pictures. So why should we follow the rules? It does mean those rules start to get undermined.
But Simon's right. Simon is absolutely right in terms of the message it sends out when there is one rule for one and another for the rest of us. That's my concern. But obviously the rules have to be followed, but the optics of not following the rules send out the most damaging message in the fight to control the virus.
Exactly. Now, keep asking us your questions. What do you think about taking children abroad this summer if they're unvaccinated? Are you concerned about them maybe bringing in new variants or having problems at school as a result? What do you think about Wales not having fan zones, even though Denmark fans can travel to Holland for the match? Welsh fans instead have to book a table somewhere and sit quietly to watch it. Good luck with that, David. And how do you feel about the VIPs getting into Wembley without quarantining when, of course, no England fans will be there because we're going to choke on penalties in the semis, maybe the quarters. I'll ask you about that at the end, though, Dan. But first, we do have some good news to give you, and here it is. Can I just point out, we were giving people the good news on this show long before the Mirror started their more hopeful good news section, which they started this week. But we do it anyway, because there's always something funny going on, even in the worst and darkest times. And here we have children trapped in lockdown have £190 million in their back pockets. Now, surveys have shown, Darren, that 7 in 8 of us grown-ups are having money problems, finding it difficult to find 2 pennies rubbed together as a result of the pandemic. But, we know now where the money's hiding. It turns out the kids have got it. A study has found they've got an average of 150 quid each in the piggy bank, partly a result of pocket money not taking quite the same hit. They didn't go on furlough, did they, as the adults did? And partly because 1 in 8 had a side hustle, like running a stall. 1 in 20 were making things to sell, like jewellery and cakes. But I suppose the bad news is that 1 in 10 of them have got a secret hiding place for their money that no one else knows about. So, Darren, you've got more than one child. That means you've got, 450 quid in your house? How many kids have you got? It's not
I've got 4 kids.
4?
I've got 4 kids. And I've got to tell you, Susan,
cash in your house, mate. Go and find it.
Well, my house is actually a mess because I spent the hour before we came on air turning it upside down trying to find their money. I can't find it yet, so I'm going to keep looking after I finish this. But I love the way that Ruki said that our consumer editor's written this, because I'm wondering if the people that are doing the survey have been talking to Richie Rich and all of his mates. I mean, all this money that they've got. I'm sure some people watching this will think, really, £150? That's a lot of money. But she's right, of course. I mean, just like we've been saving money from not going to work, traveling to work on public transport, where fares go up every 12 months with no discernible improvement in the service. We've been spending money on expensive sandwiches when we go, people who work in the city and other places. The kids have been saving their birthday money from their aunts and their uncles.
They can't sneak off for a cigarette now because they're in the house with mum and dad. They can't go around the back of the school bus with, kind of white lightning, can they? No.
Well, I was just thinking, actually, if I do find that money, I'm going to put a smoke alarm in the house so that I can smell if they're sneaking off for a cigarette or not.
You just want cameras, mate. That'll do it. My kid's only 5, so I know exactly how much money she's got and where it is. It's all coppers, and I've given it to her, and it's a little pot that's about that big, and she counts it like every day. It's quite good. It's about 38 pence. It's not going to get me very far. Now,
I love your saying that. I love your saying that. Forgive me, I know we'll come to Jill in a sec, but I love your saying that. And one day you will stumble across a jar with lots of 10s, lots of 5s.
And I'll go, great, pop! I'll call you up, Darren, and we'll go, come, let's go for a drink. Tell her we had a burglary. Now, Jill says, hello, I'm in London. My children are in the USA, and they've been recommended to have both vaccines. Yes. I'm not quite sure what the point is. The USA, I think, is trying to vaccinate children. I don't know quite that most places are accepting vaccinated people for travel. I think you're talking about there, and they are. The US is going to accept that, and there's some talk perhaps that the US could be added to the travel green list for the UK, because they are doing a bit better than us now. Donald Trump's not making a mess of everything. Israel, says Mary, is now urgently vaccinating children, and so should we. They were ahead of us, Darren, on the vaccination program. They opened up sooner when 3/4 of the adult population were jabbed. It does look like children are going to have to get it at some point, but the UK government's waiting for more data before it does so. Do you think it's going to be happening?
I think they're heading that way. I think the scientists are suggesting that they want to go in that direction. I'd still be quite keen to take a watching brief on it. I think with adults, there is still so much of the adult population who have yet to have the jab, as particularly, to be frank, in the Black community, where a lot of people are still not sure, still unwilling. There is still work to do with adults before we get to children. So I know lots of people are coming on saying that they would love it to be with children. The rate of incidence, I know we talked about the absence of school, but the rate of incidence, comparatively speaking, is low compared to the adult population. And that's the reason why the scientists are holding fire on that.
I would say that the chance of school infection at the moment is 3% around, that 3% of children there's school infection. That's 1 in a class of 30, which means a good chunk of that class, if not all of it, would have to be off school to isolate.
Yeah, and I know that for a fact because my daughter's off school for that very reason. Somebody has tested positive in her class, so she has had to be off. But if you see 1 in a class of 30, she didn't show any symptoms. My daughter will be back at the start of next week. And I think there are lots of people. I mean, Simon, I'm sure you'll read Simon's details out now, but there are lots of people who still feel that at this stage, it's better to focus on the adult population before we get to the children who aren't that much of a priority.
Yeah. Now, Simon, I think, is talking about our suggestion in the good news that children have lots and lots of cash knocking around. My children don't. I'm a disabled dad with a disabled child, plus a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old. I had to shield for 10 months with them, trying to homeschool them from 2 schools with 3 different classrooms online at the same time. I survived on food parcels and vouchers. Thank you for telling us, Simon, and for sharing your story. There are always, when you have surveys like this that says, there are billions of pounds that people have saved up on not spending money on lattes, that they're going to go out and splurge and save the economy. There's always usually far more people who are going to be struggling. And it's people like Simon there that I think we should remember a bit. There are disabled children. There are children of disabled parents who are not going to be holidaying and who cannot holiday and who are still going to be sort of semi-shielding, I suppose, even after the instructions to do so have stopped until the pandemic is over, which could be some years. As he says, how often do we need to get vaccinated? Is it going to be a yearly thing? They're talking this year not only about booster jabs in the autumn, but a flu jab as well, because just when one pandemic's over, flu's coming back to get us again. We've had 18 months of no flu. Natural immunity to that has therefore taken a nosedive. And when travel is opening up, the flu, which tends to circulate around the globe on a seasonal basis, is going to be coming back to get us and causing problems with the NHS next winter, when we perhaps will have some lovely new variants as well. So that's worth bearing in mind. What absolute joys we've got coming up for us. Thank goodness we have some really clever people running the country to keep us all safe. I'm sure their children have got some money under the mattress. Perhaps we should all go around, and once we found how many children Boris Johnson's got, we can have a look under there and see how much cash they've got. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Thank you for joining me, Darren, and taking us through that. Good luck to England and Wales in their ball of foot matches that are coming up shortly. And I hope you enjoy getting knocked out quite soon. Bye-bye. See you next Monday for another news agenda.